Men always think they're going to win with investments. Women, we worry about losing. What we need to do is marry those two mindsets. And I think women could be well served by their risk aversion. They just need to see the options.
What do you think the biggest misconceptions are around investing?
That's a broad question. I think the biggest misconception about it as a profession is
Michelle Connell, CFA, is owner, president at Portia Capital Management, LLC, and adjunct professor for Naveen Jindal School of Management at the University of Texas at Dallas. She is the author of The Wall Street Cowgirl and has over 20 years in institutional investing, advising clients, foundations, and high net worth individuals, helping them build wealth, and advocating for inclusive opportunities in finance while sharing insights through media and teaching.
people don't talk about investments. They still don't. When you see what money can do, that's when you go, this is kind of cool. It's going to give you the freedom and the control over your life.
What do you think are the conversations that need to be happening that aren't happening?
It still baffles me that so many women...
All right, welcome back to another episode of Built for This. Today's guest is someone who is reshaping how we think about wealth, not just as numbers on a page, but as a tool for building a life that actually feels aligned. Michelle Connell is the founder and CEO of Portia Capital Management, where she works with high net worth individuals, families, and entrepreneurs to design investment strategies that go beyond performance and into purpose. Her path into finance wasn't just about markets. It was about recognizing the gaps in access, in understanding, and in how wealth is traditionally communicated, especially for women. And she's built her career around changing that narrative. She's also an author, using her voice to simplify investing, challenge outdated beliefs, and empower people to take ownership over their financial future with confidence. Today's conversation is more than just money. It's about leadership, decision-making, trust, and what it really means to build something that lasts. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jenna. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig in today. I would love to kind of start off by learning a bit more, about you and your background and sort of, what were those early years like for you and kind of what sort of prompted your journey into finance?
Do you want to go back to school and...
Yeah, let's do it.
Why? My father was a dean of a business school when I was growing up. And so I was around a lot of academics who, were in the finance arena. And so I was interested in it. And then age of 12, my parents were divorced. My mom had never worked. She didn't have a high school education. And so it was tough between the ages of 12 and 15. And at 15, I went to work full time to support my mom and my sister and tried at the same time hang on what you need to do just to get through, basic schooling. But I've always been interested, even at a young age, with stocks and ticker tape and watching the prices go up and down. So I knew that was the path that I wanted. And I also saw my mother struggling, and I knew that money meant that you were not going to have that struggle, that you're going to have choices over your destiny, and you weren't going to be stuck in a situation that you didn't want to be in, that you could actually move on and do some things, not just for yourself also, but for your family and for others who may not have that ability.
And I'm curious, through seeing that, how you started to kind of develop your relationship with money. It's really interesting in terms of a conversation a lot of friends and clients have about growing up and even in relationships, speaking about money or talking about it or really starting to interact and sort of really understand how it impacts your decision making. And I'm curious, from your perspective, looking back, how you started to see maybe some of your initial passions or even the way you wanted to kind of move through the world from that perspective, growing up and seeing, such a different way when you kind of have it and then when you don't have it.
Well, growing up, most of us anyway, had friends that did very well financially and got to do a lot of fun things. They never had to worry. They knew that they were going to go to college. There was more certainty to their life. And the conversations at the dinner table also included money. Whereas if you were from a background not like that, even middle class and below, but especially those that are just struggling, money and the options of how you can get from where you are currently to where you want to go. People don't talk about investments. They still don't talk about investments. And when I talk to young professionals, they are like, okay, I'm starting to do well, but now I don't know what to do with it. Uncomfortable for them. It's new. And so they don't know where to begin. And that's true whether you're a woman or if you're a marginalized man who just, those discussions weren't talked about, and it was never even something that was even broached. So if you talk about investments to children from marginalized background, they know what money does because they see that through sports figures and celebrities, but they don't understand what's going on underneath that.
Yeah. And, when you started moving into the world as a career and kind of getting into finance, perhaps somebody, has experience kind of like scarcity or having to step up in a long way would kind of choose, we'll call it the larger company and like kind of security and sort of working your way up in a large firm versus kind of eventually going out on your own and kind of having a bit of a risk there. So I'm curious, how did it start out for you and sort of where did that decision point come where you really wanted to build something of your own?
My background in finance started with banking, starting out as a trust operations clerk, and that's where I saw portfolio managers within a bank. And I'm like, okay, well, how do I get from this clerk position over to this portfolio management position? And so I set myself up in terms of, okay, I need this for an undergraduate degree. I probably need an MBA. I probably need a CFA if I want to do institutional finance. So I saw what was needed and how much also experience you needed in a more regular, larger finance background. So I went and worked at a large bank, at a private bank, and I also worked in private equity for a firm in Chicago before moving to Texas. And to be honest with you, moving to the South as a woman does not have a lot of options, whether you are a woman or a minority. So I got to a point where if I wanted to use my experience instead of just going in and having a title and earning a good paycheck, but not using my knowledge and what I knew was the best way to handle clients, there was no other option than to start my own firm. And frankly, probably should have done it 10 years earlier because you can do things the way you want in terms of not only investing, but doing the right thing by clients. That's harder to do when you're working in a big organization and you have lots of levels and you've got compliance and you have profitability that's important at the end of the day, sometimes before the clients.
I'm curious from, your experiences moving through the world of finance, especially moving from kind of institutional into private equity. A lot of women I've spoken to have had, I'll call it the experiences that cause them to develop a lot of grit and resilience. They've either had to, 100x outwork somebody who, especially a male counterpart who does significantly less, and had to kind of figure out a way to really stand out or, make a complete career pivot because that path just wasn't bringing them much passion or joy. I would love to hear like some of your experiences navigating that world that is predominantly, even still today, like male dominated.
If you look at the world of institutional money management, we're still less than 2% of the firms that manage institutional funds are either owned by a woman or a minority. So that really hasn't changed at all. You see more women perhaps at the entry levels, but after a certain point, because of the backgrounds that you're talking about, the experiences, women go, do I really want to do this? Is it worth the price? Or do I want to start a family? Because you are going to have to put in more hours. And so sometimes the difficult choice is, I'm not going to stay in this role. I'm going to do something that's lesser so that I can have my personal life. And that makes a lot of sense because you do have to make a lot of sacrifices. It's just part of the deal. But in doing this, think of a woman who lived through the Wolf of Wall Street era, because that's basically what I did. And that's also within my book. And frequently, I was the only female portfolio manager, wherever I work. So that was just, and that's up until in the last 10 years. A lot of that is still not changing after a certain point. That's not true with financial advisors, but if you're talking about somebody who's making decisions at a mutual fund or a private equity or venture capital, you just don't see a lot of women.
And where for you along that journey, and I know you mentioned, when you moved, obviously you kind of hit a ceiling in terms of what you were able to do or where you wanted to go in certain capacities. So what were you kind of seeing, then that just like wasn't staying right with you, that sort of was that big catalyst of like, okay, I want to go do this and do this my way?
Not able to get a job in the roles that I had been in the past, and just, continuing to not find something that it would pay the bills, but it's not going to use my experience. So if I wanted to go in and just do what I call more of a menu approach to asset management, where somebody hands you a list and says, okay, here's what you can use, versus my doing the research and finding the managers or the private investments, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So maybe that's part ego, but I also know that's what I trained for years. That's what I like. That's what gets me excited in the morning, not doing the menu approach that doesn't do much in terms of motivation. So it was knowing that, okay, I might have a lot less, which you do when you start from nothing, versus if you go and continue to work for a bank and you work off a menu or a brokerage firm, you're going to make a nice salary, but number one, you're not going to be challenged. And it's a lot easier for someone to replace you when you, as I used to tell my students, everybody wants the big, nice, expensive jobs at JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs, but you have a target on your head too when you do have downturns. And versus when you own your own firm, it's yours. And unless you screw up as the owner and lose the clients, it's yours at the end of the day. And you're building that, and that provides some security that corporate America, less and less provides.
Yeah. I find that a lot when then I do a ton of talent acquisition, especially if I'm doing in the finance sector or venture, and people coming out of those large firms. And again, it's like that first internship is great. You get all this exposure, but guess what? Next year, it's like, okay, 50%, 70% of those teams are gone. Those top producers are going to be the ones that have the most clout to kind of stay or make a decision. But it is such a competitive landscape. And again, from a work-life balance is pretty non-existent if you want to keep that spot and have different choices at your hand. And I'm curious, for you along the way, for people even thinking about making that move or worried about sort of stepping out and finding that confidence, was there a key mentor for you at that time to like kind of give you that extra confidence, or what came about where you're just like, you know what, I just viscerally know I have to do this and I'm willing to accept kind of the risk of it all?
Well, I had been mentoring for the International CFA Challenge at a university outside of New Orleans for 6 years. And they had a large foundation go to the university, the head of finance at that institution, and say, we're having problems, and just the advisors we have are not cutting it. We've brought in people from the East Coast not working for us. Can you help us find somebody? And he goes, I can't manage the money for you, but I know a woman who can. That was me. And that was just through, going in for 6 years, for 3 to 6 months every year for that 6 year period, for nothing, by the way, just mentoring. And so I was like, you know what? Most people don't get that opportunity to start with a large client. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to build my firm around this opportunity.
I love that. And then in terms of, as you started to kind of move that direction, and you, again, recognize that you kind of had the luck of getting a large client right away to be able to sort of build that. What for you in terms of building Portia Capital was really important based on your prior experiences and how you wanted to set yourself apart from where you had been or different firms you had worked with?
Being able to take care of clients' investments to the point of when we do have pullbacks, that I'm managing against that downside risk instead of taking the more normal or general approach saying, okay, I'm going to ride the markets. I'm just going to do a passive approach. And it's easy to ride those waves and then say, okay, well, the market's down, you're down, but we're down with everybody else. My goal has always been to lose less, because people take their entire lives to build their retirement funds. And if it's a foundation, or a charity, they especially need their investment gains and income. If things are horrible and it's a recession, that's exactly not the time to go back to them and say, we've had a really bad time. I lost X percent, and I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to, put that money into your community, or in the instance of this foundation, we're not going to be able to build a brand new youth center this year because there's more poverty, but that's just the way it is. So I take that very seriously, that I don't want to just take the easy way out and say, okay, well, I'm going to take my fee and just write it and, build a firm of more clients and basically be a firm of mediocrity. I would rather have less and do more with it.
And in terms of when you started to build that and then get really clear on what you wanted to do, have you had any kind of moments along your entrepreneurial journey of where it could have gone either way, where you kind of hit that roadblock of like, I don't know if this is going to survive, or I'm going to have to pivot and do something else that really kind of shook you to your core while you were going through the build?
The first couple of years, I worked full-time as an adjunct professor at UT. I had to figure that out on my own too, because basically the professors of finance, more often than not, are PhDs or PhD candidates. You're handed a syllabus and said, here, cover this, have fun, and you've got to figure it out. And so I was doing that full-time while I was building my firm, and it was, first few years were pretty tough.
And was there anything kind of through that helped you sort of kind of keep you grounded through that time, in terms of kind of having everything all at once and not sort of veering off what you wanted to do?
No, because I'm just too stubborn not to, you got to figure it out. And I also saw that my results for the foundation were good and better than they had with their past advisors. And despite the fact I may have had less and I was building from a very small base, I also know that my background is very unique versus most advisors. Most advisors are more, this is not the institutional side, this is the retail side. They're more sales oriented. So I know my abilities. So I was too stubborn to quit. And I also was good at being a professor and helping my students navigate going out in the real world, versus somebody from academia, saying, okay, well, you should do this, this, and this. I haven't taught since before the pandemic, and I still have not clients, but students that come to me and say, you gave me some really good advice. I had a young man last week that came back to me, and I'm like, damn, that's, a long time ago. That's several years ago, but they remember those lessons, and then they were able to apply them when they were looking for work and or when they were hitting, their first job or so in finance or investments.
And I appreciate the core trait being stubbornness. Did you always note that about yourself since when you were young, or do you remember a specific moment where you're just like, I just refuse to quit? That's just when you came up against a certain issue when you're growing up, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I'm definitely built like this. That's for sure.
I think it's two things. It's probably my background, because when you're the oldest child in a situation like I was, and you're bringing in the majority of the money for your mother and your sister at a young age, I think you're too stubborn, because you have to keep going through the difficulty, and you can't stop because there's no other, option there. You can't fail. You just have to keep getting up and doing it over again. I think it was that. And it was also, I had a lot of people that I used to work with that continued to, they were in some really nice jobs. And I'd get pushback from people I worked with, usually men, saying, maybe you should just think about going and being a barista in Starbucks. At least you'd have, benefits. And I'm like, you can probably guess what my internal dialogue was, at that point, what I wanted to say to them. So you just want to prove those people wrong. And a lot of those individuals, if you were to ask them if they'd want to start a firm, they wouldn't want to, nor would they'd be able to. And because it's just, if you've got family and kids, whether you're male or female, it's going to be really, really hard to do everything well, especially in the beginning.
As you're teaching, as you're building your own firm, and then also recognizing what was discussed or not discussed sort of at your dinner table in terms of, access from investing to money, where do you think sort of even still to this day, the fear is around, money, and how people can start to begin to shift that conversation or understand that a little bit more?
I think especially for women, I think it may be more in our DNA that we worry about losing versus a man. You can tell this from, meme stocks during the pandemic or now prediction markets, right? All men are willing to, it's becoming really big part of investments, especially for younger men, where it's like, oh, well, who's going to, win this game, or, to the point of who's going to, do well playing golf, or some instances, even world geopolitical events. Women would never, more often than not, women would not do that, because we are so risk adverse that we're going to go, I'm not going to risk that money, which is good. So men always think they're going to win with investments and in careers, by the way. They're always
I was about to say the offer stage is very different with men and women.
Yes, yeah. Whereas a woman will go, well, I don't know 2% of this job. Whereas a man goes, well, I don't know 80% of this job, but I'm still going to go running, into that fire. A woman is not going to do that. And so what we need to do is marry those two mindsets. And I think that's where I was fortunate enough, I didn't have a choice. So I see more of the upside, but I definitely see the downside. So I kind of marry those two. And that's what I would like women and people who have not had exposure to investments think of. Okay, yeah, for instance, right now, which I love semiconductors because I started out as a semiconductor analyst, things are getting expensive. So how much left do I have to make? How much could I potentially lose? I always look at investments that way. And that's how I decide to buy a new position or hold on to an existing position. And I think women could be well served by their risk aversion. They just need to see the options. I still see a lot of women holding on to way too much cash, whereas men will put it all. I know a journalist recently, he should know better. He's a finance grad, and he put his retirement account into a crypto thing, and it disappeared. It's $1 million. It's gone. And I'm like, you know better. You are a journalist. You write on this stuff. What were you thinking? But it's the greed thing. It's like, we all want that payoff now instead of thinking, okay, well, that crypto platform sounds good. Maybe I put 5% of my portfolio, instead of thinking that way. Whereas a woman would go, well, I'm not doing that at all.
Right. What do you think the biggest misconceptions are around investing?
What kind of investing and work, what kind of role? Because that's a broad question. I think the biggest misconception about it as a profession is everybody has the same set of information. Everybody thinks, oh, well, you're a financial advisor with this brokerage firm versus this other person has a firm. They're not looking at what that person's background is. And it's very easy for someone one day to wake up, like somebody in Texas recently was tired of selling peanut butter at a farmer's market. So he became a financial advisor and he started a retirement firm, and he's bringing a lot of money with his buddies who also don't have any direct experience in investments, but they've taken the exam, they set up the firm, they've done what they need to do, legally from a compliance standpoint with FINRA and the SEC. So they're fine until they're not. So I think people think everybody's the same. Well, they're not. Not only do they not have the same experience, but they also don't have the same. A lot of different moral compasses out there, or lack of, and that still exists. I still see it all the time. I read it all the time in advisors' newsletters, and people are still taken advantage of. People with a lot of money who I would think have professionals around them that would tell them otherwise. So that's my biggest concern, is that somebody will say, oh, well, I've got this great advisor over here and they know exactly what you know. And I'm like, probably not.
Yeah. And I mean, I see that a lot too. And it's really interesting in terms of, what people get attracted to, whether it's charisma and like a lot of, like, I'll call it buzzwords. But if you were to drill down past that, like marketing spiel, there's not a lot of substance under there. And then maybe, back to the fear around money, and depending on how you were raised or what you were exposed to, and you do, have worked hard and you do have some access capital that you want to, start to invest in, what would be sort of your key areas for somebody to really question to make sure that who they're about to partner with in that way and trust their money with can ask to avoid making a bad decision?
I'd start with the FINRA SEC website and see if that person has any dings or complaints against their record. People just don't even do that.
A lot of people don't know you can look up broker checks and names and see.
And you can see stuff there. I will also say the problem is that after a certain point, some of those dings dropped off. I did not know that until I ran into that myself against a competitor. I'm like, I found some stuff regarding this person, but it's not here at all. So sometimes it's not there. But that's a good place to start. Talk to, obviously, their clients, get an array of clients and just not one or two that they're cherry picking. Find somebody that's similar to your own situation and really look at that person's background. What were they doing 5 or 10 years ago? Were they selling homemade peanut butter at the farmer's market in Dallas? That personally, that's not who I would put my investments with. And I would say that a lot of my finance students know just as much, if not more, than most financial advisors. And people, especially women, just assume that advisor knows everything. And so they'll let that person talk over them. They won't ask questions. And that's another thing. Ask questions from the beginning and throughout your relationship. So it's your money. Ask always. And I think that's something that even foundations and charities board people, female board women, will not ask anything. They'll just assume, well, that advisor knows what they're talking about. Maybe they don't. And if you don't understand it, it's on you if it doesn't turn out the way you thought it would be. To some degree, you have to take some responsibility and say, well, why didn't I ask that?
And I always think there's still, for whatever reason, some sort of fear around speaking up in certain rooms from a female perspective of like, something does feel off. I can feel it in my body. And again, taking a moment to figure out like, what is the question I want to ask? Like, and if I get kind of pushback and just saying, I don't trust it, like, that's valid. Keep going that direction and dig further. You don't have to have everything perfect like right away and be able to challenge them from every single technical perspective either. You can just also sometimes I just say like, just trust your gut. Like if it's off, it's off.
Yeah, there's a reason why we have that intuition. And it's more, I also describe intuition as you've lived through a similar experience before, and now your nervous system is saying, lived through this before. I've been in this kind of situation where somebody's talking to me like this, and it's not like, oh, it's some sixth, paranormal sense. It's the fact my brain knows I've listened to this before. It didn't end well. And it's saying, you know what? You might be going down that same path again.
And, as you kind of look back and sort of where you're headed now, how has like your leadership style evolved in terms of, how you work with clients, your team, and sort of things along the way that you've had to unlearn that maybe were kind of embedded in you earlier?
I also ask more questions because I've had to learn that if somebody is pushing back with what you're saying or suggesting, it's not personal, something that's important to them, and you need to find out why it is important to them. And as women, I think we always take it to heart. It's always, oh, it's personal. No, it's not personal. It's business. And why is this person asking this question, or why are they not comfortable with what you're suggesting? You need to take a step back and try to understand what's going through that person's head and what they're feeling. More often than not, it's fear, uncertainty, especially when it's money. It's always uncertainty because people are afraid, even if they've got a lot of it, unless it's like a huge amount, they're afraid that it's not going to be there. Especially if it's self-built. I mean, I've known a lot of millionaires that the market goes down a little bit, or you have a situation like Iran war, and it's like, oh, should we just like go all into cash? And you just can't take offense at it. You just have to go, okay, they spent so many years building this, and they don't want it to go away. They want it to be there when they need it.
And how have you learned to, especially, in the industry you're in the role you have, how have you learned to kind of guide yourself, but also clients and team members through uncertainty when, markets take a turn, or you're starting to get a lot of, scarcity kind of communications from people who just don't really understand what's going on. But again, comes back to like, I don't want to lose this. I have all this fear around it.
Actually goes both ways, because sometimes you have people that want to chase because some things are doing so well in the market. And so you have to pull people back then and say, okay, this is why I think this is not a good time to do that. And hopefully, you'll come to some sort of agreement with that individual. So it's a discussion both ways, with individuals, whether it's fear, that everything's on fire, versus fear of the other type of fear of missing out, which motivates a lot of people too. So you have to be able to engage people for a full discussion, so you understand as many facts as you can in order to make that important decision. You're not going to have all of them, but it's going to be enough that your odds of success are higher, because you've asked the questions of what could go right and what could go really wrong.
Yeah. And before we get into kind of the like inspiration for the book and all of that, I would love to learn a little bit more from your experience of, I'll call it, what you saw from working with people who maybe had less capital to invest, to be able to work with, ultra high net worth individuals or foundations, and sort of the lessons maybe in mindset or how they were looking at kind of building wealth that really landed.
I think if it's an individual that you're working with that's all self-made and comes from a background where there was no money at all, because I've got clients like that where I look at them and I go, wow, congratulations. You've really, gone outside your entire generation, generations of lack, and you've built something. So you're working with somebody like that who doesn't want to do anything different at all. All right. Because that fear of loss is so high, versus someone who has more money and therefore they have the ability to lose some and it's not going to affect them. or they've made so much money, like I'm thinking about my large foundation, they get to a point where they go, yeah, go ahead and do this private deal. It's done well in the past, and that's how we're going to continue to develop the wealth that we need to increase our mission and our outreach to our community is by taking risk. That's very different than when I started with this foundation, for instance, where they didn't know if they're going to be in existence in 5 years and they weren't going to take any risk at all, versus now where we have at least 25% illiquid alternatives, meaning private equity, venture capital, seed capital, private credit. I know it's a bad word, but it's not always a bad word. It depends what kind of private credit you have. So there's a very different mindset. And it's also a mindset of experience, right? If you understand these types of investments that wealthy and institutions have relied on for years and it's brand new to you, it's a learning process. And then you become more comfortable with it. And then you're more willing to allocate. You've taken baby steps. Your advisors helped you and said, okay, I'm just going to do these small slices. We're not going to put a lot. We're just going to see how they do. And then if after you've experienced success, through some nice private deals, and you're like, okay, I'm comfortable with that. Let's allocate more, because it's an understanding, right? Versus like, I've never done this in my life, or our institution's never done anything like that.
Yeah.
Like anything else, it's just acquiring that comfort level.
And is there anything kind of that surprised you in terms of those differentiators of clients, of a mindset shift or something that allowed them to either interact with money differently, or if there was an experience in life that caused that kind of mindset shift of maybe being out of scarcity to a higher risk tolerance, or, feeling like perhaps maybe they don't deserve to have access to certain deals, or a little imposter syndrome, to really understanding where they've gotten to and being able to kind of come from that more abundant place in your experiences with different styles of investors?
I found it interesting when I worked for a firm that was owned by a female, and she catered to female entrepreneurs. The female entrepreneurs would take a lot longer to do private deals, even though that's the world that they're working in, because of that safety or that fear. Versus, a male, men will take on that risk faster. They just don't have that issue. And I think that's also true with wealthy people, sometimes to their detriment, because I've seen a lot of wealthy people, because they knew somebody who knew somebody, they threw a lot of money in a private deal without doing the homework, because they're all in this group of people that they know or they grew up with, they went to school with, without doing the homework. And then they're like, oh, it'll be fine. And then it's not. So it's interesting, because I think sometimes wealth also gives you a false sense of confidence, and you ask less questions when your question list should be just as long as it was in the beginning.
And so with kind of, you moving through having all these different facets of your life and then building a really successful firm, was it always in your mind, even when you started out, that you wanted to write a book? Or is that something that kind of happened to you later, where you had the light bulb moment and you're like, I need to write a book about it?
When I taught at University of Texas, Dallas, I was a favorite professor because I would always weave in stories with, like, if you're teaching basic corporate finance, which is what I started with. Later on, I chose advanced finance, taught advanced finance and investments. But if you're talking basic finance concepts and equations and present value and future value, it's boring. It's just boring. So I would weave in stories of what I've been through and provide entertainment and allow them give them an ability to learn something faster through a story that you could associate with it. And one day I had a female student said, Professor, you should really write a book. And I'm like, yeah, right, whatever. And there were certain stories that students liked, people liked, and I'm like, maybe I should. Why not? I mean, everybody wants to write a book, but I will say it's not easy unless you're going to, especially if you're not going to go the self-publishing route and because so many people want to write a book and we have less publishers, we have less literary agents. So it's a long game. I mean, I've been writing this off and on for 5 years because I'm running a firm, and I'm writing articles and stuff too. And now I'm just at the point where I worked with a coach so that my stories would be more engaging, because I'm an analyst by nature. So I will tell the story, but I'm not going to make it all interesting, like, okay, it was this environment, this person was wearing this, or this was a dialogue. I had to learn that. So I worked with a coach for over almost 2 years. And so to make my stories palatable. So again, process. And why am I doing it other than it's a lot of work their day. So I'm like, even though I'm this close, and my literary agent is sending out my book to publishers right now. I'm that close, but I know that I'm still going to have to go back and scrub, and you've got to edit, and it takes writing. No one wants to write. People barely want to read. They want to listen to everything. So, but I wanted to tell stories, and I wanted to help women take more risk and more people that weren't born of money and also be entertained while they're learning, and hopefully take some of that money that they make and make an impact with different charities or causes that are important to them. Because you really can. I really could care less about making rich people richer so they have more money to spend. I think it's more important, if you're privileged enough to have some money, to make some impact with it for something that's really important to you.
And is there anything that's really surprised you throughout your book writing journey? Outside of like, this is taking a lot of time and it's more difficult than I thought it would be, but even just getting the stories out or things that have come up where you're like, oh,
What's really surprised me? I gave some of my stories to somebody, a female who's in the business, and she's like an internal person that represents somebody who sells institutional products. And she really liked it. I got great feedback, and I'm like, well, maybe it's not that bad, because you always have that concern. This is crap. No one's going to care. Is it going to sell? Because that's the other thing too. It's got to sell a certain number of books, or else a publisher is not, they're going to go, why? Okay. Yeah, this is a great story, and everybody thinks their life is a great story, but am I going to sell 20 or to 50,000 books? And you have to be able to prove that. And so I always find it amusing now. Now I just shut my mouth when people go, well, I've written a book. I'm like, yeah, I'll get back to me in 2 years and let me know how far along or not you are with that. Unless you've got somebody that can help you, like a ghostwriter or something. And that's not really going to tell your story anyway. It's going to be in their voice. And that's the other thing that surprised me, is that people said they could hear my voice and my emotion with my stories, and they could hear my concern. And that resonated versus just writing something that's flat. That's more important to me. And it may take me another year to get, please God, no, to have it in my hand. I'm hopeful that, we'll have a publisher ASAP. By the way, getting the literary agent's the hard part.
Yeah.
That's the hardest part. Otherwise, self-publish. Just go and spend your money, and it'll take you a lot less time.
And I'm curious, I find with women who are high drivers and high achievers that there isn't a lot of space created versus to actually look back or celebrate or look at moments where you're like, I had no idea how far I'd come or how big that moment was going to be, because I was just like, gotta keep going, trucking forward. And so is there, in writing this, a moment that you can really like see and feel now of like pride and like, I did that and everything was stacked against me in that moment, and like, really kind of celebrate where you are today?
I haven't celebrated and I really need to. I don't know when I don't know if when that's gonna happen. I keep saying it's going to happen. I suppose when I have the book in my hand, but then I see people that are really good authors. Like if you're really good, like my literary agencies represent some really, really, really strong authors, then you have to go out and schlep it. So it's like, okay, they've even said they haven't enjoyed it yet, and they're like, very, very, I don't want to say best-selling authors, like New York Times and especially women. They're not. And more often than not, these women are writing also when they've got a full-time job, because anymore, writing doesn't pay. So the only people that can write are somebody that has a full-time job or somebody who's rich, because you're not going to be able to sit at home and write without some sort of income to pay the bills, right? And that wasn't the way it used to be. It was easier to do that. Now it's, everything's so expensive, you really can't. It's harder to be a writer for that reason, economically.
Yeah.
So I consider myself blessed that my firm's at the point where I can go, okay, well, these mornings I can write and I can worry about my firm the rest of the time.
Okay, so celebration will happen when book's in hand, but we haven't had any moments so far writing where you're like, oh, wow, I forgot that this happened to me, and that's actually a really big deal.
Well, when I got the literary agent and I had to go around to find a literary agent through a university publisher, I'll just say I didn't realize how rare it was. I'm like, oh, yeah, this is great. And then I had a client that helped me through the process because she's published 2 books. And she goes, do you realize how rare this is to get this? I'm like, oh, it is. And so maybe I took myself out to dinner, which is just ridiculous when you consider it's been like 5 years, right? Should do something a little bit more involved than going and getting good Mexican food, which I think is what I did. I went and got fajitas and oh yeah, this is great. 5 years for fajitas.
Yeah, that has been the challenge that I have tried to, like, conversation to start, but then also accountability to uphold, celebrating more, especially across women, because we're just so, for whatever reason, naturally inclined to keep our head down and keep going, and eventually it'll happen. But making the space along the way just makes, I feel like, difference, give you some capacity to breathe and recognize that it hasn't always, been that way or that tough, or all those successes and roller coaster moments along the way.
We need to think about how many times, and I know I was ready to quit in December. I was like, okay, we can't find anybody. I'm just gonna have to self-publish or forget this book. It's crap. Just forget about it. Forget about the, writing instructor, blah, blah, blah. I don't care anymore. I'm done with it. We need to remember how many times, we started so long ago, and you're right here and you're this close, and it's like, just, you've taken yourself this far. And a lot of people won't. A lot of people don't have the ability or the intestinal fortitude, or maybe they are not as financially, they just can't do it financially.
Yeah.
So we are fortunate to be able to have choices, because a lot of people, especially now, they don't have choices.
No, I think that's really important. And kind of going off that in terms of sort of looking forward in the future, how do you see the future of wealth management evolving, and like the role of women in it evolving?
We got an issue here because we don't have enough women. We have female advisors, but we have the average advisor, no offense to white men, okay? They're like 57, 58 years old, and they're all retiring, right? Okay, at the same time, I don't really think you need an advisor when you're young and you're building your wealth. Just go and do a bunch of index funds up to about $250,000, $500,000. But that's when it gets serious, when you should start asking questions and at least hire somebody to look at it occasionally. And then once it gets a certain point, find somebody who knows what they're doing. But there are less of us. And the problem is that women are inheriting the wealth. You keep hearing that part. But here's the other part of it. A lot of women are divorcing men when their children are out getting ready to get out of the house and go to college. So you have gray divorce. And the majority of divorces after 50, I can't remember, it's some horrifying statistic, 70% are initiated by women. And more often than not, those women, even if they're professional, they don't know what they have. They just know, I want my next chapter in my life to look better, but they haven't prepared for it as well as they should have, because they're too busy with the kids and or the job. And so they need to look at that piece of, okay, well, I want to make sure that my standard of living stays where it is and I can help my family or my legacy, instead of just like, okay, I'm done with this chapter of my life. I want this new chapter of my life. I get it. But that financial piece is really critical. And there aren't a lot of female advisors who are there to help with that, not as much as there should be. So we need to make the career more appealing to women,
For sure.
so that they can help, their own gender, because I still hear it all the time. Male advisors, they may not mean to do it, or maybe it's subconscious. I don't know. Women still feel uncomfortable asking questions of a male advisor. So maybe that's true in general. They're just not asking questions. So if they're going to be able to maximize their last years of their life, and we're living longer than they do, we still do, and you want quality of life, then you're going to need, unfortunately, as much money as you can.
Yeah. And what do you think are the conversations that need to be happening that aren't happening?
I think you need to have that internal discussion. It still baffles me that so many women don't know their finances. Even they don't know what the household has. They don't know how much, the equity is there in the home. And I try to get women involved, and more often than not, still, I don't understand it. They don't want to be part of the conversation. Like, even if you're having like a review, they're like, just tell me that I have enough money and I'm going to be okay. Well, I can tell you that, but don't you want to know why and how much you have and how much you think you're going to need to have in 10 years or when you're no longer working? Don't just be so frazzled that you're forgetting about this important piece, which is going to give you freedom ultimately. I know money can be boring to people, but it's going to give you the freedom and the control over your life. And things aren't getting any cheaper. So
I'm always surprised too, and kind of going back to, mentioning like women like divorcing and wanting, a different life after whatever happened, married too young, whatever the reason is, completely having no actual sightline to what their household finances are like and what they have access to, or asking questions. I know people in marriages are like, I don't know. I'm just like not allowed to like look at those bills. I'm like, don't you want to know what those bills have on them? Or like, I get it. If you've stopped working, you're not the, main money provider right now, but to go back to understand like what's going on, or them finding themselves in a financial position months later of like, oh, we have to move, this happened, but having no insight into why. And I find it fascinating to just kind of why women let go of that option or understanding or partnership.
I think it's still a topic that people are not comfortable with, and they just don't. They would rather give that responsibility to something else. But ultimately, you're also handing over the control of, what your future is going to look like. I mean, not to get depressing, but you have a lot of women that are over, retirement age, that more and more are retiring into poverty. And yes, we make less. Yes, we work less time-wise because we're typically taking care of children and our parents. So we have less money. But if you haven't asked any questions to help yourself, your options may be a lot less than you thought they were going to be.
Yeah. And how do you think we can get over what can only be perceived as like obviously a power dynamic of women feeling like I don't have the power in this situation, to maybe get back in control if they've sort of let that piece go?
I don't know. I really don't know, because people ask me that all the time. Well, how are we going to get more? I've had big firms that are, recruiting women. They're like, how do I get more women interested? They're not interested even to get in the field. And I'm like, you're asking the wrong woman, because I frequently tried to encourage female students. They're like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to do, no. I'm like, well, you're great with numbers. You should think about it. Now I want to do this instead. Yes, some did, but more often than not, they don't. I don't know, but I think there has to be something that we experience when we go, hell, that really can make a difference in somebody's life. That can make a lot of difference in my life. Because when I started investing, not just as a professional, but as a person, I thought, wow, we were able to put down a decent sized down payment on a home in San Diego. And that was because of my investing. I was like, wow, that makes a huge difference. Or like when I see what the money does for my foundation, it's like, oh, well, we now support 9 schools. We made so much money in the last couple of years. We built a brand new youth center for the poor children in the community, because they had nowhere to go after school or during the summer. When you see what money can do, and I'm not buy stuff, but how it can influence somebody's life, that's when you go, this is kind of cool. I like this, because that's what motivates me to do well by clients. I'm like, that's a lot of money. I wonder what we can do with that.
Yeah, the possibility.
Like every month I call up my foundation. I'm like, okay, we made this much money, or we didn't lose any, and this is how much we're going to have at the end of the year. Start thinking about how you're going to spend it. That motivates you. It's not like, okay, I made X% over the S&P. I don't give a damn, really. But I do care about the performance from the standpoint of what that money can do.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I want to kind of close out with some rapid fire questions with you.
Okay.
All right. What is one money belief you've outgrown?
Sometimes valuation doesn't matter. Sometimes, especially as a tech person, I'm like, okay, I can't know everything about a technology company or technology stock. I can know about the probabilities. I can't be even myself. I have to take more risk in those situations. Whereas 10 years ago, I would have gone, okay, well, I'm doing the cash flow analysis, and it looks like Taiwan Semiconductor, I don't see how they're worth this kind of multiple. They are, because their market keeps expanding, and I can't put my mind around that. So the valuation thing is where I've had to become more, okay, looks good. I'm doing it.
Yeah, that's fair. One non-negotiable in leadership.
Moral compass.
Agreed. Best financial advice you've received.
Always invest in disruptive technology. Is that your entire portfolio? No. But that's where you're going to continue. If you look over time and you just look, the basic market versus disruptive technology, huge difference. Yes, we've had some periods that have been abysmal, but if you just held on, you would have been great.
A recent powerful moment.
Getting that literary agent at the beginning of the year. And by the way, I had it on my bathroom mirror. I will have a book deal, or I will have some sort of contract by my birthday, which was the end of January. And I heard from that literary agent the Friday before my birthday.
I love that.
After 5 years.
Yeah, some things take time.
I know, but I just thought it was really weird, because I never believe in that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, just visualize it or put it on a board and it's all going to happen. Now I kept writing it on my bathroom mirror, and it's like, oh my God, it happened. What? Great.
A word defining this next chapter for you.
Charity.
And final question. In your own words, define what Built for This means to you.
Grit and empathy.
I love that. And so for anybody listening that wants to keep tabs on when this book will be accessible and or learn more about what you do, what is the best way for people to connect with you?
Well, I have a pretty built out website that also has videos of what my investments have done in foundation and its community in Louisiana. So I think it's very cool. It doesn't say, aren't I great? It just shows what money can do in terms of impact. Website is www.portia, Portia, hyphen the word capital, capital, hyphen the word management, all spelled out.com. Portia was named for the female Shakespearean heroine Merchant of Venice because she stood for ethics and justice.
I love that. And we'll make sure everything's linked below so it's easy for people to click and move forward. I appreciate you taking time. It was so great to learn more about your story, how you built where you're at today and where you're going next. And I look forward to staying connected.
Thank you, Jenna. I hope it was helpful and it was enjoyable for your listeners too.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.